Welcome back! My name is Baller Scuba. This is Video Games Over Time. We are still in 1986. Today, we're going to talk about some more honorable mentions of 1986. On October 6th, 1986, Areolasoft released Deactivators to British computers. Designed by David Bishop and Chris Palmer of Tigris Marketing, Deactivators is a puzzle game. The player controls bomb disposal robots who must remove bombs in 5 research complexes before time runs out. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time, but was not commercially successful. In October 1986, Ocean Software released Parallax to the Commodore 64. Parallax was developed by Sensible Software, produced by D.C. Ward, and programmed by Chris Yates, with art from John Hare and music by Martin Galway. Parallax is a scrolling shooter. Named after the parallax scrolling done in the game, Parallax has the player take control of an astronaut who must fight against an artificial intelligence to save his friends. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. In 1986, the Learning Company released Math Rabbit to American computers. Designed as a spin-off from Reader Rabbit, Math Rabbit is an educational game. The player enters a circus and has 4 games to choose from, including a counting game, 2 matching games, and a sequence game. These are all designed around helping young children learn math. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. The Learning Company also released Rider Rabbit to American computers in 1986. Rider Rabbit contained 6 minigames designed to help children learn more about reading and grammar, all based around Rider Rabbit preparing for a party. Many games revolved around sentence fragments or completing sentences, but also gave the player the opportunity to create their own stories. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. In October 1986, Gary Gygax resigned from TSR. Gygax and TSR had been struggling to work together for years, but when the Blooms sold their shares to Lorraine Williams, who would then become president and CEO, Gygax was especially displeased. He took TSR to court to block the sale of the shares, but lost. Though the company was beginning to turn things around, Gygax resigned all positions in October and reached a settlement with the company in December 1986. Gygax gave up all rights to Dungeons & Dragons except to Gord the Rogue, the protagonist of his written works, and to the characters whose names were based on his. Gygax would then help form New Infinities Productions Incorporated with Forrest Baker, who had been a consultant for TSR. Gygax would then license the Greyhawk setting from TSR to continue writing for Gord the Rogue. On October 30th, 1986, Konami released Vampire Killer to MSX computers. Known as Akumajo Dracula in Japan, the same name that Castlevania was released under, Vampire Killer was designed by Akihiko Nagata with music by Kinuyo Yamashita and Satoe Terashima. The game is considered a parallel version of Castlevania and was developed at the same time as the original. The player plays as Simon Belmont with a mystical whip who must enter Dracula's castle and slay Dracula. Vampire Killer expands slightly on Castlevania, adding new items and sub-weapons. The main difference in this game, though, is that Vampire Killer has more of an open world with more areas for the player to explore compared to the linear Castlevania. Vampire Killer has received mixed reviews over time. On November 6, 1986, Capcom released Hyperdyne Sidearms to arcades. Designed by Yoshiki Okamoto and Noritaka Funamizu, with music from Ayako Mori, Hyperdyne Sidearms is a scrolling shooter. Up to 2 players can play as either Lieutenant Henry or Sergeant Sanders, and must pilot a mecha known as a mobile suit to defeat the aliens. The game offers several power-ups, but one of note is a chibi version of the mobile suit named Mobi-chan, which gives the player an extra life. In November 1986, Capcom released Legendary Wings to arcades. Known in Japan as Aresu no Tsubasa, or the Wings of Ares, Legendary Wings is a scrolling shooter. The game was directed by Takashi Nishiyama, with design by Hiroyuki Kawano, Hiroshi Matsumoto, and Akira Kitamura. In the game, up to 2 players can play, attempting to defeat an alien supercomputer named Dark with the help of the wings of love and courage given to them by Ares. In 1986, Simon & Schuster Interactive released Star Trek: The Promethean Prophecy to American computers. Designed by Ron Martinez and Jim Gasparini of Transfiction Systems, Star Trek: The Promethean Prophecy is an interactive fiction game. Based on the Star Trek television show, The Promethean Prophecy has the player take the role of Captain Kirk on an exploration mission in the Prometheus solar system. The ship is attacked by an unknown entity, so a landing party must beam down to a nearby planet to find resources. Critics at the time were positive about the game. In November 1986, the Atari Corporation released Solaris to the Atari 2600. Created by Doug Neubauer, who also created 1979 Star Raiders, Solaris is a space combat simulation game. In the game, the player takes control of a spaceship with the ultimate goal of reaching the planet Solaris to rescue its colonists. The game plays similarly to Star Raiders, however Solaris also adds the ability for the player to land on planets. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time, especially for its graphics on the limited Atari 2600 console. In 1986, Atari ported Marble Madness to computers. With several different companies programming the different versions of the 1984 arcade game, the different ports received varying reviews from critics at the time, but many were largely positive. In November 1986, Micronix ported Ghosts and Goblins to the NES. Already released in Japan for the Famicom in June, the combined worldwide sales of this port of Ghosts and Goblins would be over 1.6 million copies. In 1986, Ocean Software released Batman to British computers. Designed by John Rittman and Bernie Drummond, Batman is an adventure game. The player plays as Batman, who must collect the parts of Batman's hovercraft scattered around the Batcave in order to save Robin. The game was successful and was reviewed well by critics at the time. In November 1986, Micronix ported 1942 to the NES. Already released in Japan for the Famicom in December 1985, the NES port of the 1985 arcade game would be successful, selling over 1 million copies worldwide. In 1986, Gremlin Graphics released Trailblazer to the Commodore 64. Designed by Sean Southern of Mr. Chip Software, Trailblazer is a racing game. The player plays as a soccer ball. The player must guide the ball through a series of passages as quickly as possible. Critics at the time were very positive about the game. In November 1986, Capcom ported Commando to the NES. Already released in Japan for the Famicom in September, the NES port of Commando would be popular as well, selling over 1.1 million copies worldwide. On November 21st, 1986, Konami released Stinger to the Famicom Disk System. Known in Japan as Moero Twinbee, Cinnamon Hakase o Sukue, Stinger is a shoot-'em-up and a sequel to the 1985 arcade game Twinbee. In the game, up to 3 players can play as Twinbee, Winbee, and Gwynbee. The players play through several levels, scrolling in different directions, earning power-ups through bells that change colors when shot. On November 26, 1986, Taxan released Mappy-Land to the Famicom. Developed by Toze, Mappy-Land is a platform game and sequel to 1983's Mappy. The player plays as Mappy, who plays through 4 stories in the game, typically surrounding Mappy and his love interest Mapiko. The gameplay is similar to the original Mappy, with the player needing to collect items on the screen while avoiding the Meowkies. On November 26, 1986, Paramount Pictures released Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home to theaters. Directed by Leonard Nimoy and starring the original Star Trek cast, Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is the fourth film in the Star Trek film franchise. In the film, the crew of the Enterprise attempts to return home after the events in the previous film. However, they find Earth in trouble as an alien probe is attempting to contact the extinct humpback whales. The crew must find a humpback whale somehow to answer the probe's call. The film was a success at the box office and received largely positive reviews at the time. On November 27, 1986, Bandai released Dragon Ball Shenlong no Nazo to the Famicom. Developed by Toze, Dragon Ball Shenlong no Nazo would be known as Dragon Power. The game is based on Dragon Ball, following roughly the first 2 volumes of the manga. The game follows Goku as he fights enemies in both overhead and side-scrolling perspectives, culminating in a wish from Shenlong. On December 5th, 1986, Micronix ported Tiger-Heli to the Famicom. This version of the 1985 arcade game received mixed opinions from critics at the time, but it was successful. On December 5th, 1986, Game Arts released Silpheed to Japanese computers. Silpheed is a scrolling shooter. The game was directed by Takeshi Miyagi, produced by Yoichi Miyagi and Toshiyuki Uchida, designed by Takeshi Miyagi, Masakuni Mitsuhashi, and Osamu Harada, and programmed by Satoshi Iwasaki, Nya Nekoyama, Akira Ai, and Tomoyuki Shimada. Silpheed would feature art by Satoshi Iwasaki, Nobuyuki Ogawa, and Akira Ai, and music by Fumihito Kasatani, Nobuyuki Aoshima, Masakuni Mitsuhashi, and Hibiki Godai. In Silpheed, the player plays as an SA-08 Silpheed starship. The player's ultimate goal is to destroy the Zakalite terrorist organization. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. On December 10th, 1986, Sega released Alex Kidd: The Lost Stars to arcades. Featuring music by Hiroshi Kawaguchi, Alex Kidd: The Lost Stars is a platform game. The game features Alex Kidd, returning from Alex Kidd in Miracle World, and a female counterpart named Stella, who must go through each level in search of the 6 Miracle Balls. Once they have that, the players go into space to carry them to Ziggurat and complete the last level, the Shrine of Gygax. Then the players will have to go through the levels again with new enemies. The game received mixed opinions from critics at the time, and is often most known for the scream Alex lets out. On December 14th, 1986, Sega released Astro Warrior to the Master System. Astro Warrior is a scrolling shooter. The player controls the Astoro Raider, who must fight the invading Devil Star Imperial forces to save the Solar System Allied forces. The game received positive reviews from critics at the time, but modern critics have been less kind. In December 1986, Williams Electronics released Joust 2: Survival of the Fittest to American arcades. Joust 2 was designed by John Newcomer and programmed by Joe Hellenson, Christina D'Onofrio, and Warren Davis. It featured art from John Newcomer, Jake Hager, and Tim Elliott, and featured music by Chris Granner. Joust 2 is a platform game and sequel to 1982's Joust. The player plays as a knight riding a flying ostrich. The player's goal is to collide with enemies while slightly above them to defeat them. New to Joust 2 is the ability to transform the ostrich into a Pegasus to give additional prowess while on the ground. The game was not as successful as the original Joust and was not received as well by critics. In December 1986, Konami ported Gradius to the NES. Already ported to the Famicom in April, Gradius marked Konami's first NES game. This version of the game would be popular, selling 1 million copies worldwide. Konami also ported Gradius to MSX computers in 1986. The MSX version of the game would add new content compared to the Famicom and NES version, including a new stage with new enemies, hidden warp zones, and the ability to play as Twin Bee. In 1986, Durrell Software released Fat Worm Blows a Sparky to the ZX Spectrum. Designed by Julian Todd, Fat Worm Blows a Sparky is an action game. The player plays as a microscopic worm who is being chased across a circuit board. Critics at the time were positive about the game. In 1986, Atari Games released 720 Degrees to arcades. Designed by John Salwitz and Dave Ralston, with music by Hal Cannon, Earl Vickers, and Brad Fuller, 720 is a skating game. The player plays as a skateboarder, who can go into one of 4 different levels when the game starts. Each level has 4 events in it: the ramp, the downhill, the slalom, and the jump. In each event, the player will need to perform stunts in order to earn points, which will determine how long the player can play and will earn them another ticket to go into another area. In order to win the game, the player will need to complete all 16 events. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. In December 1986, Data East ported Karate Champ to the NES. This port of 1984's Karate Champ was inspired by the player versus player edition of the arcade game. This version of Karate Champ was not particularly successful. In December 1986, Fuji TV released All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. To the Famicom Disk System. All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. Is a promotional, graphically modified version of Super Mario Bros. It was given away by the Japanese radio show All Night Nippon and features graphics and characters based on the radio show using the slightly upgraded graphics and physics from Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. On December 18, 1986, Sunsoft released the Wing of Madoola to the Famicom. The Wing of Madoola was designed by Kenji Sada, programmed by Kenji Sada, Atsushi Sakai, and Kenji Kajita, featured art from Kazuyuki Sugiura and Kenji Mori, and featured music by Naoki Kodaka. The Wing of Madoola is a platform game. The player plays as Lucia, a magic-wielding warrior. Lucia must go through 16 stages, defeating bosses to retrieve the Wing of Madoola and stop the evil Darutos. The game received mixed reviews from critics at the time, but the character of Lucia would become a popular character for Sunsoft. On December 21, 1986, Sega ported Space Harrier to the Sega Mark III in Japan. This version of 1985 Space Harrier would add a story in which Harrier saves the land of the dragons from destruction. It featured a new final boss, a dragon named Haya-O, named after Sega's president, Hayao Nakayama, and a new ending. This version was received well by critics and would be transferred to North America's Master System in March 1987. Sega also ported Space Harrier to computers in 1986. These versions were also fairly limited in terms of technical quality, but critics at the time were largely positive about these versions as well. In time for Christmas 1986, Hewson Consultants released Paradroid Competition Edition to British computers. Released in a double pack with a modified version of Uridium known as Uridium Plus, Paradroid Competition Edition is a modified version of Paradroid playing faster than the original. On December 26, 1986, Taito ported Arkanoid to the Famicom. This version of the 1986 arcade game would be reviewed well by critics, who said that the game was nearly a perfect version of the original game. However, the port was not particularly successful. In 1986, Activision released Hacker 2: The Doomsday Papers to computers. Designed by Steve Cartwright, Hacker 2 is the sequel to 1985's Hacker. The player plays as a hacker once again, this time tasked with infiltrating a secure facility to get the Doomsday Papers to ensure the safety of the United States. The game adds different gameplay when compared to the first, as well as more challenging obstacles for the player to overcome. Critics at the time largely were positive about the game. On December 26, 1986, Nihon Busan ported Crazy Climber to the Famicom. This port of the 6-year-old arcade game was not particularly successful. In arcades, the most successful arcade game at the time was the Nintendo Versus system. By 1986, Nintendo had sold over 100,000 cabinets for the system. In total, there were 32 games available for the Versus system. Some highlights of the games released in 1986 were Versus Super Mario Bros., Versus Gradius, and Versus Mighty Bomb Jack. However, the Versus system was splitting games for the system between regions more often, so only 20 of the 32 games were available in North America, and only 25 of the 32 games were available in Japan. In 1986, Nintendo began releasing the PlayChoice 10 system in arcades. This system was designed as a successor to the Versus system, allowing players to play NES games in an arcade setting. Players would be able to play for a set amount of time, playing any of the games available on the cabinet. Each credit would get the player a minimum of 2 minutes. Among the first games available for the system were Excite Bike, Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, Hogan's Alley, and Balloon Fight. Let's look at consoles. In 1986, the Atari 2600 hit a new landmark number. Fueled partially by the success of the NES, the Atari 2600 hit a bit of a resurgence. The Atari 2600 crossed the 20 million units sold marker in 1986. Atari themselves published 4 games for the console, while third-party companies released 2 additional games for the console. This keeps the Atari 2600's library to over 500 games. The Famicom saw 86 games released for it in 1986, bringing its total to 183 games, nearly double what it was at the end of 1985. The Intellivision saw 5 games released for it in 1986, bringing its total to 111 games. Nintendo released 4 Game & Watch games in 1986, including 3 in a new crystal screen format. However, none of these games would be particularly successful. By the end of the year, there were 51 different Game & Watch games. The Famicom Disk System saw 35 games released for it in 1986. The sales of the peripheral itself were huge in 1986 as well. By the end of the year, the Disk System sold over 2 million units. In 1986, the NES saw 19 additional games released for it, bringing its total to 35 games. By the end of 1986, Sega had sold over 1 million Sega Mark III consoles in Japan. It also sold between 150 and 250 Master System consoles in North America, far short of the 400 to 750,000 they had hoped for. It also paled in comparison to the Famicom and NES, which had each sold over 4 times the amount of their competitors, respectively. In Japan, Sega released 21 games for the Sega Mark III in 1986, bringing its total to 26 games. In North America, Sega released a total of 29 games for the Master System. It is important to note that of the consoles and arcade systems that we are tracking at the end of 1986, half of them are owned by Nintendo. Nintendo by itself made more money in 1986 than the entire video game industry made in 1985. That will do it for the honorable mentions of 1986. My name is Baller Scuba. This has been Video Games Over Time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video when we go over the year that was 1986.